Hey guys, if you're jumping on, I see you're jumping in the chat right now. We'll get started in a few seconds and give everybody an opportunity to get locked and loaded for this really great call. All right, if you're hopping in right now and you want to go to the chat and tell us where you're calling in from or videoing in from, I guess, how do you say it? Webinaring in from, you can tell us where you're at. Georgia, not Georgia, a town, where you work, all your personal information that you want to share with us. Ah, here we go. Cold Mountain, Georgia. I like it. And your name's Tom Petty. Woohoo. Cool guy already. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to Wildlife 101 with Ranger Jen. This is our second Wildlife 101. And if you're just jumping on, folks are putting in the chat right now where they're coming in, where they're calling in from, maybe what they do. Are they a resident? Are they a business owner? Do they work for another city? Kind of what your affiliation is. And you can also put in here why you're interested in this topic. So that's okay too. There'll be opportunities for you to ask questions and answers throughout the time. We've got somebody in Milton, Georgia at Providence Lake. I'm really excited to have you on this call as you're looking at the lake while we're talking about it. So I'm going to go ahead and kick this off, tell you a little bit about what we're doing and why you're here. All right, well, my name is Jen Young. I work for the city of Milton. A lot of people know me affectionately as Ranger Jen, and I've been with the city now for 2 years, just over 2 years. My role primarily focuses on connecting Milton residents with the outdoors, whether that be through a recreational activity or a passive activity like hiking, biking, climbing. Unfortunately, we don't have great climbing or biking areas yet. I use the word yet, but hopefully with me in this role, we can move some of those initiatives forward. Another piece of what I help Milton residents do is also connect with the things in their backyard. So Wildlife 101 got started because I was getting a slew of calls from residents asking about the wildlife that was in their backyard, things that they would see in our parks. And if you're not familiar with Milton, we have over 1,100 acres of public passive land. Most of that's really untouched. It's just woodlands. And so you'll find three or four ponds and small lakes that you can fish on. And I get a lot of questions about our ponds. I get calls about personal ponds and, maybe suggestions on how they can, make their pond either more eco-friendly for wildlife to come near it or a better fishing pond for recreational activity. Few things that I do is a learn to fish program. I really try to focus on building young fishermen. And so this is a kids program from ages 5 all the way up till generally I train parents to fish. I also have a junior ranger program, so you can learn a little bit about environmental education. And then this Wildlife 101 series, which is to educate the public on topics they're curious about. So you'll get an opportunity at the end. If you'd like to see more webinars on topics that you're curious about for the future, we have all the space for you to add experts on content you're interested in. Our next one is going to be called Would You Believe It? Everything You Want to Know About Beavers, which I think is a great segue after talking about ponds and fishing and fisheries. Ranger Jonah from DeKalb County, he's going to teach us all about how to live amongst beavers or how not to live amongst beavers, what they do to your property, and what they can do for your property if you're looking for that. So we would ask you to join the webinar like you did this time, if you're curious and interested, or share it, we'll go ahead and put in the chat the site where you can view this, the last one, and the next one. You can view all the webinars at our website. Few housekeeping items. So as you'll see, you're muted on here. Your way to interact with our guests is to put your questions in the Q&A. So if you have a question that you want Gage or Greg to answer, you're going to go ahead and put it in the Q&A. They can answer it throughout the presentation, and they might hold it till the end. I know Greg is going to be super interactive with y'all, and he'll love for you to give feedback. And so if you just want to share ideas, or you want to just share a little bit more about what brought you here, you can put that in the chat, and we'll be sure to highlight that. So like I said before, your feedback's super important to us. We want to make sure we're sharing content that you're interested in, and that helps you on your property or in a future property that you might want. So you can always email me if you have ideas, or share it in a survey. Otherwise, I want to tell you a little bit more about this guy, Greg Grimes. I mean, you can read this all here, and you can learn more about him on his website, and I'm sure he's going to tell you a tiny bit about him. But what I can say is, when I started working in Milton, Greg is a household name, and DNR shared his services with me. Residents of Milton were sharing the wonderful things that he's done for their ponds. And having been in the industry for 30 years, he's quite the guru. So if you have questions, and I'm sure he doesn't love me saying that about him, but it's rare that you show up somewhere and someone's name is just often handed to you by a variety of people. So beyond just doing lake and pond management, there's just slew of services that his company provides, which I'll let him tell you a little bit more about. And I know he does quite a bit of work in our neck of the woods up here in North Fulton, Cherokee County. He's up in everywhere, really. So if there are things that you want to hear more about, or ways that you want to connect with Greg, you'll have an opportunity at the end to collect his information. Otherwise, I'm going to turn this over to you, Greg, and stop sharing my screen.
Awesome. Am I coming through all right?
Yes, you are.
All right. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, we're excited. This is a different format for me. But we have been doing this for a while, and it's kind of crazy when you say 30 years. I did not think it was going to be that long, for sure. That we're in this industry, which went by really quick because we love what we do. So been very blessed to travel the US and worked in 26 states all around the country on some really, really cool projects. One little highlight is that about 10 or 12 years ago, we started the Society of Lake Management Professionals. So, which is really cool. It's attended by most of the lake management companies around the country now, and it's been really nice in sharing information that we all have. And luckily, we work in an industry that we've got a lot of sharing knowledge and information that we can pass on. Again, love my team, love what we do, love being in God's creation, and love educating other people to get the right information. And that's really what we're trying to talk about tonight is we could talk a lot about certain topics, and I could talk for hours on end. So we're just going to hit pretty quickly on some, hopefully get some questions throughout the conversation, throughout this presentation that we can answer to that you want to hear about. But yeah, you can see some of the stuff there that Gage put together. But let's get started here, Gage. So a little bit about the company, just so you can tell we do know what we're talking about. We've been doing it for a while. Our guys stay pretty educated. That top picture is us at the Society of Lake Management Professional meeting. We try to stay on the cutting edge of certain things related to how to run a business, but really about how to grow big fish and how to have good, clean water and beautiful water bodies for our clients. I hate talking about ourselves, but real quick. I mean, we like to just got a call, ironically, today from a gentleman in Milton that's interested in building a pond. So we started that maybe 10 years ago. So if you're thinking of building a pond, we come in at the very beginning stages and and lay that out and work with the permitting and the engineers and the contractors. And then we'll do the habitat along with that and then stock the fish. So then manage it from then on out. Some of our services are fish habitat design, lake designs, lake mapping, water quality. That one fish picture getting a swab is checking genetics on the bass, which is really cool. A lot of fish stocking. People think that's all we do sometimes. There's a lot more to it than that. Lime applications, and then we have a myriad of lake services like feeder installs and treating vegetation, which we'll talk about a little bit. I love just putting a smile on a kid's face. You see some big bass, and that's what pays the bills. And I love to catch big bass, but just as important is just that first. Some of the first time a kid goes fishing, a lot of times it is in a small body of water, just a little pond they may call a bluegill. So not everyone's going to be on a big boat on a reservoir. So we want to create smiles as much as we can. All right. So the first myth. Engage, if you get any questions that chime to these topics, feel free to let me know. But the first myth is that I want my water to be really clear because it's going to grow more fish and it's going to be healthier. While you don't want a pond that's going to be muddy red, we're in Georgia, so you have red clay and it's going to stay in suspension for a long time. If it does happen, after a storm event, that's not what you want. But also, you don't necessarily want crystal clear water because what that means is that it's not growing much in the way of plankton, phytoplankton to be more specific. And without the phytoplankton, you don't grow as much zooplankton. That means you don't grow as many aquatic insects, which means you don't grow as many small fishes that then feed bigger fishes. So um, you can take a lake that's really clear. It might produce 100 to 150 pounds of fish per acre. You can take one that's a deeper green. It's hard to explain that, but one that we use what's called a Secchi disc, and you lower it in the water column. And if it's got a good green tint to it, that's going to grow many, many more pounds of fish, upwards of 400 pounds of fish an acre. So just because the body of water is green, it doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. In fact, it means it's a good thing. It means it's going to grow many, many more pounds of fish than one that's crystal clear. One thing I wanted to mention here too is lake dye. A lot of people think that lake dye is a wonderful thing, and it can be in the right application. It can help you after a muddy pond or a rain event and the pond is muddy. It can help that color. But if I want to make sure I tell you this, if you apply dye on a routine basis to a body of water, it's blocking the sunlight, that's what it's talked about. It looks nice. It looks pretty if it's done right. If it's done too much, it looks kind of like Thunder River, like my shirt or something. It's a little bit too blue. But what it's doing is it's just blocking the sunlight from vegetation growing, which is fine, but it's also blocking plankton production. So the cleaner the water, the clearer the water, I should say, in a lot of cases, it means that it's not going to grow as much plankton and you're going to grow less fish. So just keep that in mind.
All right, Greg. So we have one question, if you don't
Okay.
mind answering right now.
Yep.
Specifically, what does brown water in a lake or a pond mean, and what causes it?
Yeah, this is tough, and I'm going to talk in general, which is, I'd love to ask for specific questions, but it could mean that it's got suspended clay. It could mean it has suspended organic matter. It could mean that it is cycled and that the green water I talked about is a little browner, and that could be zooplankton. If you do see some brown water, and Ranger Jen, I'm sure has seen this and can take some kids and show them this sort of thing, but just hold it up in a glass bottle and look at it. If you see little critters moving around in there, that's zooplankton. So sometimes it could be zooplankton as well. But most of the time, when you're seeing one that's really pretty turbid, it's going to mean that there's something has ran off into the water body. And again, it could be temporary. It could mean that it's suspended clay, and there's a couple of techniques we have. We can apply alum or gypsum to help precipitate out that suspended clay and clear it up. But that's probably what it's going to be, is suspended clay. see a couple of clients' names popping up too.
And another question, you may have seen it, but how do you change the water color for maximum light and plankton growth?
How do you, is there a future slide? Okay, yeah, we'll park here. I can't remember what's all on the slide, so we'll talk about it now. Typically fertilization. I could have made a slide on this for sure because we are shifting fertilization and gets a little heady and I'm going to try to be sensitive to time to get to some other topics, but um, cyanobacteria is something we do not want to grow. And a lot of times, if fertilizer is done improperly, it's going to grow cyanobacteria. For many, many years, we would fertilize water bodies routinely throughout the growing season if it became too clear. We still do that some, but if you see a nice 30 or even 36 inches of a green tint, that's probably chlorophyta or some other beneficial plankton. If it's really obnoxiously green, though, it's cyanobacteria. The problem with that, it can cause cyanotoxins, which are harmful to, you may read about sad stories of dogs dying or something. It can lead to that. I don't want to scare you, but it can. Um, so over fertilizing could be a problem too. So I want to answer that one, Gage, that what you can do is add nutrients to the body of water, maybe more early spring. That's when juvenile fish are coming on and you want to get the little aquatic insects growing. But once it's 30 to 36 inches, where in the past we used to say 18 to 24 inches of green water, it's good. It's growing a lot more food than if it's say 6 foot of visibility. So we would add nutrients, whether that's nitrogen or phosphorus. Used to be phosphorus, now maybe it's more nitrogen, so it's getting complicated. But we would add those to the water body to grow more plankton.
All right, and somewhat related, you may want to save this one for later, but we do have a question about sedimentation if you'd like to answer that now.
I don't think we have that one later either, and or I don't know if I mentioned earlier, I have a mapping service where we monitor sedimentation. Um, yeah, that's related. So
Yeah,
actually,
so
with the city of
the
Milton's, yeah, go ahead, Gage.
yeah, the question specifically asks, in an older lake where inlet coves are getting filled with sediment and leaves, what does this have on the health of the lake, and what would you recommend to have done to clean those inlet coves out?
Yeah, so started to say like I grew up in the city of Milton, so back then it was called Alpharetta, but it was where City of Milton is now, and a lot of development. So as much as we try, anytime you develop a site, sediment's going to come off of that site and go into a slower moving body of water. So it gets tied up in moving water, and then once it hits the slower moving water, like the inlet of a lake, it's going to fall out of solution. Clay particles usually stay in suspension, but sandy particles will fall out right away. So what it's doing is taking an area, making it shallower. The shallower the body of water is, sunlight's going to hit the bottom and grow vegetation. It's also going to, over time, a lot of leaves and all of that build up in a mucky layer. It's high nutrients. So it's just making the environment horrible for several different species of fish to try to spawn, but namely bluegill. So they may have had an area that's a nice, 3.5 foot of depth where spawning was perfect, where they had some gravel substrate. Now it's a mucky layer that's a foot deep, and you'll see beds there, but they have to fan and fan and fan to get down to that hard substrate. So it interferes with the spawning. And of course, it fills in the lake with sediment instead of having a deep body of water that you can recreate on. Even if you're not a fisherman, it's just going to cause an eyesore. To combat that, a couple different things. Typically, you're going to talk about dredging. Again, logistically, if you're out in the country, it's a little easier. That's where Gage is working all day today on a site in Macon that we just dredged and we're putting in fish habitat. But when you're up closer to the city of Milton, maybe you've got a lot of homes around this body of water, so it's tough to get in there with traditional dredging equipment, which would be lowering the lake down, dredge the material out, haul it offsite or on the property somewhere. Now there's some pump or hydraulic dredging. So you put in a boat that's going to suck out the muck layer, put it into these bags where the water goes back through and the sediment's held in place. And so you're getting it out that way. Or another way is aeration. Um, aeration is going to create an aerobic environment, so beneficial bacteria can actually consume the sediment, consume the organic sediment, I should say. And then there's some bacterial products that you can also add that are going to eat the muck layer up. That takes time. Some of the stuff touted, I could put on a myth slide too, that they're going to decrease muck layer by a foot a year. That's not going to happen. But over time, it is consuming some of the organic layers. But typically, you're going to be looking at dredging to get rid of sedimentation.
And one more slide, one more question on this slide. Maybe a quick answer. You may have something a little bit more complex, but is there a specific water temperature that we should start fertilizing at, or does that vary based on pond condition?
Yeah, typically I want a consistent, and that's the key word, 55-degree water temperature is really getting up towards 60. So about now, because if you notice as a perfect example, we had some really warm weather the last few days. Well, a couple of weeks ago we did, and then we had some nighttime temperatures in the 30s. So you may have wasted the fertilizer because there's not many plankton species that grow at water temperatures below 55. So you want the nutrients to go into the water when you have multiple plankton species that are going to grow, and that's consistently above 60 is better, and you don't get a cold snap that may kill those back off again. So again, do not fertilize unless it's just uber clear during the hot summer months, because that's when you can really just add a small amount of nutrients and the plankton really take off, and you get these obnoxious blooms that could go to cyanobacteria or could go so thick that's going to cause a fish kill. So typically start in the spring. We usually say sometime March, middle of April, before May. And then we're really going to back off that fertilization when it gets hot in the summer months. And then maybe one more time in the fall if the body of water says it needs it. In other words, it's still clear. A lot of questions for one slide. All right. Catch and release. So let them grow, let them go to let them grow. And so very fortunate. Some of you guys may know Ray Scott that founded BASS. He was a client a little while, and he started this whole catch and release thing. And I'm now getting to be pretty old myself, but when I was younger, maybe not so much, but it was changing when I was a teenager. And I would brag about it. Like, man, I'm not going to take those fish. I'm going to let them get bigger. It's probably the worst thing that's ever happened to pond management. And Ray Scott said so much. Probably one of the best things that happened to public reservoirs in general, because so much harvest was taking place. Now it's even starting to impact some reservoirs. But what we're getting at is that when you hear someone say, well, if you kill the fish, it's never going to get any bigger. True. But if you don't kill that fish, if you don't take that fish out, and I suggest eating, and we got a slide on that later. If you don't take and when I say fish, really I'm talking about predator. If you don't take that predator out, there's so much competition that the other fish are not going to grow. And that is routinely, we do a lot of electrofishing work, over 200 lakes a year. And we routinely, that's the number one problem we have. Clients want to grow bigger bass, and without the harvest, and there's a picture of Kelson holding up 5 or 6 little dinkers. And most people say, oh, those are buck bass, or those are, yearling bass. They're not. In an existing body of water, those fish are at least 3 years of age. And a lot of times we'll pull out an otolith, an inner ear bone, and we can age these fish. We'll see these 6 and 7 years old. It's about gape size. So the mouth of that fish between let's say an 8 to 12-inch bass is pretty similar. What they need to eat is the preferred food so that when they're chasing around, they minimize the energy expenditure for them to grow. So if you have a lot of 3, 4, 5-inch bluegill for 8 to 12-inch bass, that's great. They can get a lot of nourishment. What we typically see is that population is missing. So we'll people say, why are my bass not growing? I look around the shore and I see a lot of little fish. Well, they're 1 to 2 inch fish, or even smaller than that. And we've done the math on it. It takes about 150 of those little tiny fingernail-sized bluegill from a recent spawn to equal the same weight as 1 5-inch bluegill. So the energy spent is going to mean they're not going to grow. They're going to get stunted because they're all eating a similar size fish, forage fish. So and we're going to talk again in another slide about goals. But if your goal is to grow bigger bass, you need to harvest a lot of bass. Typically, when I got out of school, a lot of say 10 pounds of bass per acre per year. Way off base now. Maybe if the pond is perfect, and I'll back up a little bit more. Uh, Growing up, people would take out bluegill and they would take out bass and eat them. And so the stocking plans were based on that. When people stop taking out bass, they get stunted. So once they're stunted, you have to take out up to 40 or 50 pounds of bass per acre. These fish that you see in the picture are not even, most of them are not even half a pound. So that's going to mean 100 of those bass per acre to get that lake corrected. And then the bass will start growing again. And then the next year after that, if you keep it in balance, it may be somewhere around 25 to 50 of those bass, 25 pounds or so. So it's super critical. And talking about catch and release too, let's talk just real quick. In general, if you want to have a great crappie or crappie fishery, you want to take out a high number of those, but watch what you're catching. If you're catching just slab 2 pound crappie, they didn't have a successful spawn. You don't have an overpopulation of those, but you're catching little 6 or 8 inchers, you have to take them out. On catfish, if you're trying to grow bass, let's say, or some other predatory fish, take out the catfish before they get too big because they will compete with the bass. On the other side, and if you stock trout seasonally, take those out. On the opposite side, though, and I do love to eat bluegill. Not eaten any in several years because of this, though. You don't want to take bluegill. It's not to say you can't take a few. That's fine. But again, looking back years ago, people would tell you to take bluegill. Guess why? Because they would overpopulate because so many bass were taken out to control them. Now we never see that. And I say never, I mean unbelievably low times that we ever see that happen. We want to see 3, 4, 5 inch bluegill to feed the bass, but what we see now are limited bluegill, and they're huge, because there's not many there. So taking those out while the bass can't eat them, you're taking out the parents that are going to produce more bluegill in the future. So do not take your bluegill, but go to town and take out your bass if your goal is to grow bigger bass. What you got, Gage?
Yeah, so I've got one question. And I was somewhat answering in the chat, but if you want to answer it live, that's great. They asked, can you have too much forage? Is that ever an issue?
No. We do hear that. Maybe you can have too much forage, or you can make the argument for fishing. If you have so much forage, it's going to be harder to fish. But we've got so much experience. I've just not seen it. I'm going to make the argument that if you've got a high forage base, your bass is super healthy, has more energy to run around and chase a spinnerbait. Um, and so this was an argument years ago when we first started talking about threadfin shad. Now it's pretty common. A lot of people stock that, but when we first started, that was a controversial fish. Oh, they're all over the lake. That's great. That's what you want to see. I joke with our new ponds that when we stock the forage and then we put the bass in later, that I want the bass to just open his mouth and a fish swim in it. I mean, that's the ideal world. That fish is using very little energy, and he's growing like crazy. So my answer, I always have long answers, I'm sorry, but my answer is no, you really can't have too much forage. All right, vegetation control. Just kind of made this a placeholder here, but I did want to say that if you own a pond, or you're interested in a pond, or your friend has a pond, or you're at one of the lakes that Jen has in the city of Milton, um, having it look like a swimming pool should not be your goal. If you want a swimming pool, go to a swimming pool. You want it to look pretty. You want it to not be taken over with vegetation or algae, but you also don't want to kill it all. Now, some of our clients, they want to kill it all, and we will. But you want up to 30% of your lake to be in some type of cover for your fish. And we'll talk about that again, I think, on the habitat slide. But I love some vegetation. There are some vegetation types. This is one of the topics that we can talk about for an hour for sure or more. So I'm trying to keep it a little bit limited, but um, there are some vegetations that you want to get rid of right away because it's very invasive. There's some noxious filamentous algae right now. Like it just driving today around, I saw numerous lakes where you have these massive algae and they look awful because guess what? Now you have pollen and it sits on these mats of filamentous algae. So you want to kill those off, not benefiting. But a good submerged grass is great habitat for fishes. Also, vegetation, again, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, probably should have. We're in Georgia. So Georgia has fairly unproductive water, but in other parts of the country where I work, you're gonna have massive plankton blooms that you could have a fish kill without some type of vegetation to lower your nutrients. Um, so it's taking those nutrients and growing some plants, and that's a good thing. It kind of cleans the water off. So you do not want to get rid of all vegetation. You want to have some of it there in the ideal world. It's tough. Couple different ways to control vegetation. Grass carp is a great natural solution. We sell a lot of grass carp. In Georgia, they have to be triploid, meaning they got 3 chromosomes, so they're going to be sterile. But it's kind of like if you don't put in enough grass carp, you don't see a lot of control. And if you put in too many grass carp, they just deneuter the pond. So it's a pretty delicate balance with the grass carp. And herbicides are controversial. They're EPA approved. They're safe. They're not bioaccumulating, most of them, in the body of water. So a selective herbicide that's approved, that's applied correctly, can target some zones. So you have some areas where you're killing off vegetation and not killing off all the vegetation, and maybe killing off an invasive vegetation while you're leaving some more of the native vegetation that's growing. And then you have emergent plants that are vegetation too, like cattails or lilies. They're on the shore. You can't have cattails completely take over the entire body of water. So you may want to control those, but man, I would love to have some cattails growing. So you don't want to kill it all off, but you just want to have a good game plan. And I really recommend getting a hold of a company that knows what they're doing that's going to give you some good advice.
All right, so we have one question on this slide specifically. If your pond is devoid of vegetation, what species would you recommend introducing, if any?
Well, we were just talking last night about planting. So we've done very little aquatic planting. It's something we're going to be doing more of. It can be rather difficult. It's funny. Some of the plants that can take over a body of water um, are very difficult at the beginning stages to get them rooted and growing because turtles eat that young growth, and it's you just plant it because, like you mentioned, you don't have any. Geese will eat those and pull those up too. So um, usually we're going to be talking about emergent plants. Lilies, irises, pickerel weed is a good one. Arrowhead, arrow arum. Um, you plant on the shore. You can do some lilies, some hybrid lilies that are not going to completely take over because they don't grow in very deep water at all. But you've got to be very careful because you introduce the wrong plant and it will, if it does get established, it will completely take over. So usually more of the emergent plants, the shoreline, what's called the littoral zone, and the shelf is where we're going to want to plant some of those. All right, move on to a fun topic here. So stocking plans. I want to catch some big bass, so that means I've got to stock a bunch of bass, right? In order to have some to catch. Not really. If you want to catch more bass, then stock more bass, and you're going to have more to catch. But just in general terms, and this came back way my days in master's in fisheries. I remember one of those topics, but the more predators you have, the less food you're going to have. Got back to what I was talking about on harvest earlier. So stocking plans were developed back in the 30s, 40s, 50s. People would take out fish, but those plans were developed for food fish, developed for putting food on the table. And most of the state plans that were developed back then are wrong for our clients. Not saying they're wrong in general, but they're wrong for our clients because our clients usually want to catch bigger bass. So we really shook up the industry now, God, 25 years ago. We started stocking things a lot differently. So we stock a very high forage base and a much lower predator base, and we get accelerated growth, and you get much bigger fish towards the end of their lifespan because they're able to grow the whole time. So a typical stocking plan now, we're going to talk about goals in a minute because this may shift, but if you want to go a quality / trophy bass fishery, which a lot of times you don't want a trophy bass fishery because that means a true trophy, there's not going to be very many to catch. But quality bass is what we talk about. We're going to stock a couple thousand bluegill per acre instead of some older recommendations of 500 to 1,000. And yep, we're making good money doing that, but that's not why we're doing it. We're doing it because it's going to achieve your goals. And so a couple thousand bluegill per acre, 400 shellcracker or red ear sunfish, another name for them. They occupy a little different niche in the food chain. This is all per acre. We're going to introduce fathead minnows, possibly introduce golden shiners, depending on the goals. Possibly introduce crawfish, depending on the goals. Threadfin shad if the body of water is a little bit bigger. And then instead of 100 bass per acre, we're only going to recommend 50 or 30 or 25 if you really want to push the more the trophy side. So you take a ratio that forever was either 500 bluegill and 50 bass or 1,000 bluegill and 100 bass. That's a 10-to-1 ratio. We now have a 40-to-1 ratio plus other forage. And so the bass grows so much faster. And then the question is, if you only stock, say, 40 bass to the acre, am I going to have enough to catch? What's really cool, early on, those fish are extremely aggressive. So there's a really good chance of you still catching some, even though you stocked less. Let's see, anything else before I switch topic? Yeah, so those fish are going to grow a lot faster if you stock less of those. And then, Gage, I don't think we have a slide on genetics, do we? Okay, so we'll talk real quick about stocking with the genetics too, because I saw a couple of people chumming here that I know and they want to grow some big bass. They probably already know all this information, but just in case, you really only have two subspecies of largemouth bass. A lot of times I hear about a Texas bass or California bass or Georgia bass. All you have is a northern bass and a Florida bass. Then you have an F1 bass, which is a cross, the first year cross between a Florida and a northern. And then everything else is FX, meaning it's some percentage of the DNA from a northern and a Florida. F1 bass are a great bass. The potential problem is that their offspring are not as good as they are. And you're kind of getting a little bit the best of both worlds. So an F1 is going to be aggressive, and it's aggressive because northern bass are super aggressive. I think they evolved that way because up north, they have a small growing season. So the ones that made it are the ones that really fed aggressively during the time of the year where they can have the opportunity to feed. So we love northern bass, especially feed trained northern bass. We can get them in an existing body of water that are already trained on pellets. They're unbelievably aggressive. I just had a client call, Chad Baker, if you see this, from Tennessee, and the feed train bass are unbelievable. He said, Greg, I literally was 17 for 17, 17 casts caught 17 fish. People have never fished before, easily caught the bass. So we love those in that situation. If you've got kids, if you got a small body of water, it's awesome because you can hold a higher carrying capacity because they're eating normal fish plus the feed. So that's your northern bass. And that's your F1 bass. So let's talk about the Florida bass. So the Florida bass, and while that F1 gets pretty big, but not as big as a pure Florida. The Florida bass is kind of the opposite. We're going to hypothesize the reason they get so big is they're not out using a lot of energy and chasing fish all across the body of water. So maybe you have to slow down. Sometimes maybe you have to use live bait. But they're not as easy to catch, although we've stocked them at our property down in Forsyth, and there's times where it's as good as fishing as anywhere. But in theory, you're not going to catch them quite as well, but that's your top end fish. They're going to get to be, 10, 11, 12, 14 or bigger pounds. So sometimes what we do is mix it up. So, hey, I want an aggressive fishery with a lot of really awesome fish. The northern bass, should have said this, are going to top out around 8 pounds. So they're never going to get double digits. Um, so we'll stock northerns and maybe stock 25% Floridas, or maybe we'll stock 50% northerns and 50% Florida. So then that next generation will be F1s. Or maybe we'll stock some F1s with some Florida. So you just want to think through, and we'll get into goals in a minute. But on the genetics, it is something that it's not a magic bullet. Some people seem to want to say, hey, I stocked them with these special bass. That it matters. It matters a lot, but it's not the driving force. The best genetics in the world are not going to matter unless you're doing all the other things right. So we've really put a big emphasis on stocking fish to match your goals.
Yeah, so I've got one question on this, and it may be a little bit of a long-winded question. There's multiple parts to it, but we'll start with we have a question from someone who has a very large lake, 69 acres, and their lake currently has bass, bluegill, and common carp. They're specifically asking if they should stock crappie or
Mm-hmm.
catfish. And my
Mm-hmm.
first thought is, do you want crappie or catfish in your lake?
Mm-hmm.
But what say you on that?
Yeah, so that's the perfect thing. I mean, some people think you have to have catfish for cleaning up a pond. That's not really true at all. So I love that. I mean, I love the diversity of the different things. You have to realize my answer on crappie or sockeye, they got a lot of names. We're from Georgia, so we say crappie, um, is a little different than some people's answers. You may have a difficult time establishing them because you may have a lot of bass, so you're going to have to hope that the hatchery fish, which usually the biggest we can buy is around 5 inches, are going to survive. But if you can get them established, they're real cyclical in their spawning. So a bass is going to pull up to spawn. This has happened this spring already. Pull up to spawn, you get some bad weather, get some cold weather, get some rain, they're going to pull back off, and then the conditions right, they're going to pull back up. Crappie may not do that. They pull up to spawn and you get bad weather conditions, some environmental reason, they just miss a whole year class. So you may go years without seeing any crappie reproduction and you just got some big slab crappie. But when they do have a successful spawn, you really have to be aware, especially in a 69-acre body of water, to watch what's happening. Because if they start to take over, and that's the fear of a lot of people, it can be a problem. I just stay educated, do some fishery surveys, go fishing, and monitor those fish. Um, as far as catfish go, super simple. They're not going to reproduce in the lake. Channel catfish need hollow cavities. If they do, they may reproduce. They're not going to recruit because all the young swim around like a softball, and the bass just gobble them up. So, makes it for easy management. They grow really quickly with fish feeding. So just put in maybe a low density, like 10 to 20 per acre, bigger size because they're long and skinny until they reach about 8 or 10 inches. Um, so do at least a 6 to 8, if not an 8 to 11 inch catfish, and pull those out before they get too big if you're concerned with the bass fishery. Because again, once they get big, it can be a problem. So I think I answered that question.
Yeah, and we've got, the classic, when is it right to start over with an old pond once it
Oh yeah,
becomes
That was Terry Richardson. I did see that pop up when I was talking there. So good to hear from you, Terry. So um, I will say this. Uh, Most of our clients should probably start over. They they never want to hear that from our team of biologists. I can promise though, if they would see the results fast forwarding 3 years, maybe even 2 years, they would all do it. It sounds horrible. But if you when we do our fish surveys, we routinely, not, this is not an exception, this is the norm, have a 12 to 14-inch bass that is um 6 to 8 years old. And we see it all. Well, we routinely see those 5 and 6 years old. We have seen 14-inch bass that are 11 years old, and most bass in Georgia are going to die at 10 to 11 years old. So the point is, those bass have wasted so much of their lifespan stuck at the smaller size. Fish have indeterminate growth. They're not like us. They don't grow until you're 18 years old and stop growing. A bass will grow up almost into the point of death. The last few months of their life, they're going to go downhill and die. If you see one big, really big fish that's super skinny, probably about to die. Um, so they will grow, but they've wasted that time. So we can do a lot of management plans. And here I'm going off topic, but this is probably the time to say some of this. So if you got a bad fishery, don't just go stock fish. We stock a lot of fish. We make great money stocking fish, but maybe it's water quality. Maybe you don't have the habitat. Maybe most of the time you have too many bass. So do some of these other steps, and it could mean restocking some of the forage base back into the body of water. And we do a lot of this, and we correct the situation, and the fish start growing. But you're really looking at the little bitty, you know, that year fish. Now you're doing things right, and now they're going to take off in a brand new body of water. You haven't reached carrying capacity yet. You haven't really reached carrying capacity for a couple of years. So those bass are unbelievably rapid growth. I mean, we typically get 8-pound bass in 3 years if folks follow our stocking plans. Not all of them, but the top end, and sometimes bigger than that. So it's a lot of the times with their goals, and it's sometimes cheaper because you're stocking little fingerling fish than you are trying to stock some larger forage that are triple the cost of little tiny forage. So um, when is when you think it's the right choice. To me, that's when your goals just don't align with those fish are never going to achieve the goal. So pull the trigger, drain the lake down. Maybe while you're draining it down, you can also turn around and dredge it out and create more habitat.
And then we've got another one. At what point should you stock gizzard shad?
That's a great question. Just got more and more aggressive over the years. So if folks don't know what gizzard shad are, we love threadfin. We recommend threadfin a lot. Threadfin are going to die though. Some years and about where we are. You get down to Macon, it's maybe 1 out of every 6 or 7 years are going to die. Um, get up here, Atlanta north, maybe every 4 years, you're going to get a cold winter to kill them off. Threadfin have a ton of forage potential. They build up really high numbers. They're going to pull off at least 2 spawns, sometimes 3, and build off a lot of numbers. But the biggest they're going to get is 6 inches. Gizzard shad to me are almost necessary to get. Again, I just bragged about how we can get 8-pound bass in 3 years. We don't have gizzard shad. A lot of those fish may not make it to 10 pounds, 11 pounds, 12 pounds, because they need a big forage base. So gizzard shad have their place. The stigma for gizzard shad is that they're going to take over and be a problem. I have seen that, but I typically don't see that. And the key is stocking them as early as year 2 if your bass population is doing really well, but typically year 3 and 4, because what you want to have are a lot of bass that are over 4 and 5 pounds so that they can control the gizzard shad before they get too big. The problem with gizzard shad is they get too big for bass to eat them. If they get so big like that, nothing can control them, and they don't even reproduce because their population is really high. The other key that we talked about earlier is uh, gizzard shad energies go into reproduction instead of growth if it's a productive environment. So when we work up north, we see some really clear water bodies like a strip mine, and the production is really low. So that those gizzard shad put all their energy into growing versus reproducing, and they become a problem. So it's something that it's a little bit tougher, but recommended in the right circumstance. But year 3 probably.
All right. And is there a problem with rainbow trout surviving in medium-sized ponds or maybe even large ponds, or is that not really a concern?
Oh, it's a huge concern. I think most people around here are gonna, not most people, some people are gonna say, I've got a bold spring or my lake is deep, so I can have trout year round. Very rare, extremely rare. Um, there are some places, I know a place west of here in Rome. It's just a really bold spring coming out of the water in a small body of water. They can keep them year round. We almost can here because we have our creek water routed into the ponds and it goes through real fast. I think I said that earlier. So trout, there's two things. They have to have high oxygen and it has to have cold water. And the trout can sustain themselves for many, many months. We stock a lot of trout. They're super aggressive. So you can stock them in November after the turnover, the fall turnover. And they're going to survive until about June. But the thermocline where they're living in the middle layer of the lake, where the oxygen is still okay and the cold water's there, just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So one of the two, usually temperature, is going to fall out in that middle zone and they're going to die off. Did I answer the question? No other questions
Yes,
on trout?
I would believe so.
Okay.
At least I would say so. The next question we have is, would you find gizzard shad naturally, or do most ponds that have them, are they stocked?
Yeah, well, naturally, if you're by a river that floods where they're occurring. So I should know this. I don't know this. I'm going to assume there's gizzard shad in Chattahoochee River. So if you've got some property close to the river and it floods over, I know there's a property on the Etowah River and it had gizzard shad because they would flood every year. So typically around here, you're not going to have gizzard shad unless they're stocked. Already touched on this a little bit about the goals, but this is I like the statement that's put together here. You can grow giant bass in a quarter acre pond, but only like two, because you've reached your carrying capacity pretty quickly. So most of the time that's not going to be fun. But I love small ponds. I love when a client has multiple bodies of water because you can manage it for different things. Again, I love a small pond for kids or novice fishermen or for a fly fisherman. You can put trout in the wintertime. You can put in catfish that are easy to manage, like I mentioned before, just grow them off a feeder. You can put in hybrid striped bass, which aren't going to reproduce, which eat off fish food. You can have one that's just full of little dinky bass. It's okay. Small bass, not a big, if you enjoy catching numbers, that's not a problem. We work with a ministry and they want people to catch fish. So they've got a lot of little small bass and that's fine for them. Because guess what? When you have a bunch of those little bass, you're going to have big giant bluegill. So you can purposely do that. And so if they've got multiple bodies of water, so they've got like a 5 to 15 acre lake, we're going to try to grow some of the short fat bass that Kelson's holding there. And that's our goal. But they may complain because they're not catching as many, especially on a day that wasn't the most ideal fishing conditions. But then go over to their little quarter acre pond that's just chock full of little bass, and you can catch those and you catch some big old giant bluegill. So you can have a lot of fun. I gave a talk in Arizona one time, many options on the mini pond because you can do so many fun things with that. So just keep that in mind. The one thing you can't do is grow too many bigger bass. I do have some small bodies of water again when they have multiple ponds to where we'll just put in a handful of female bass though, which is pretty cool too because we control the reproduction. You don't have them taking over. And they're just gonna thrive and take off because there's not many in that body of water. So also tied in with this with the goals, just think it through. There is no cookie cutter answer. We really try to have custom stocking plans and lay out the goals for clients. A lot of times I'm going to tell you a couple of times what we think, and then I'm going to say, that's fine. We're going to stock the fish the way you want to stock them. But I really want the goals to be driving. And a lot of times you say, I just want to catch bluegill and bass. Well, yeah, but what do you want to catch? Do you want to catch more bass or do you want to catch less bass and they bigger? Do you want to catch more bluegill or do you want to catch less bluegill and be bigger? What other fish do you want to catch? What are your goals as far as maybe it's not what you want to catch, but it's what you want your grandkids to catch. Um, so just really think through what your goals are, and that's going to drive your management. Um, so one thing, not trying to sell you here, but a lot of times, what I hear clients tell me, and I'm a hunter, so it's the same thing. Fishermen and hunters love to brag. Is I know what's going on in my lake. My lake. I got a lot of 4 pounders. Very rarely does a lake have a lot of 4 pounders. Or my lake's got a lot of even 2 pounders in their little half pound dinks I was talking about earlier. Um, but based on that information, what we might stock is going to be completely different than what a scientific study is really going to show us. So I'm going to recommend before you go spend a lot of money stocking fish or anything else is to get a fish survey. What that survey is doing is an unbiased biological sample of that body of water. Doesn't get everything. You may have 1 or 2 giant bass, and we may not have them show up in the survey because um, it's evenly distributed of what you're going to have as representative sample. But I highly recommend it. So the fish survey is going to be water quality, weed and algae ID, observations on the dam. The bulk of it is going to be a fishery survey, maybe mapping to get a hydrographic study of what your depths look like, what the habitat features are in the lake. But on the fish side, how many bluegill do you have? What size are they? Are you missing that 3, 4, 5 inch size class of bluegill? Do you have 60 or 70% of the bass stuck at 10, 11, 12 inches long, which is common? And if that's the case, then like let's find the limiting factor. That might be as simple as, hey, I only have so much money to spend on this body of water. And the first thing you do is just start harvesting bass. You can do that yourself. I like to make the joke that you heard from the biologist and tell your wife, hey, he told me to go fishing today. So you got a hall pass because the biologist told you to go fish and take some fish out. You can do it. Some people get intimidated. Oh my God, you told me to take out 100 bass. How am I going to do that? Well, on a good spring day, you can take out 20 or 30 fish. So it's not that many fishing outings to do that, but really dial in what's going on. And then at the higher level stuff, we have fish tagging. So you can tag the fish and you can start to determine the growth rates of those fish, and that'll tell you part of the picture. We've got these swabs now where we can check the DNA and find out, hey, I'm really managing the lake really well. A lot of my habitat's good, my water quality is good. We've stocked some forage, but my bass I just never catch a double-digit fish. Well, we can check the DNA and we may find out you've got 80% of your DNA of your alleles are northern. So now we're going to have to go find some pure Florida bass and stock in that lake in order to increase your Florida genetics to get you into the double digits. So you can do DNA studies. So highly recommend the first thing you want to do if you've not ever done that is to get a really good survey done first. Then you can have the data and recommendations, and we really try to put client dollars first and prioritize and just what is the budget, the first dollar you're going to spend it on this, not on that, because you're going to get more bang for your buck.
We do have a quick question, kind of more related to the last slide, but it's on common carp specifically. And are those going to be a threat to your fingerling fish, such as small trout, small forage fish, or small crappie? And how so?
I meant to say that it's maybe the same one or not, the 69-acre lake. I don't see common carp problems like I used to. I don't know why that is, but maybe not doing as many older bodies of water. But I do remember multiple times where we would literally load our entire electrofishing boat with common carp. Um, if there's a client in Kentucky, he's from England and he wants to create a common carp pond because that's what he grew up catching, and they're a very popular sport fish worldwide. But common carp root in vegetation, they definitely deter um, the recruitment of other fish. There's a body of water called Dews Pond in Calhoun, and years ago we went in there and we pulled out so many common carp. He decided to drain the lake and start over, and he had a great time fishing for the common carp when it was down to just a river. Had a hundred oh 100,000 or 1 million gallons of water a day come through this lake from the spring. They bottle the water, but it was a cool fishery because it was just basically just a river, and they had a blast catching common carp. But anyway, we finally closed the valve off, wrote a note, it killed all the common carp off in that body of water, but we couldn't go to the spring. So for a few years, it was amazing. The bass took off and grew because before the bass numbers were really low from the common carp. And so it's tracking great. The common carp kept building up the population. And then once they build up to a high enough population, they suppress the reproduction of all other fish. It becomes a very common carp dominated environment. So back to the 69-acre lake, if you're seeing a lot of common carp that are really big, that's not necessarily a bad sign that they're big because it means their population is not crazy, crazy high. But if you're going to see in a large population of small common carp, your lake is probably going to be muddy. It's probably not going to grow many other fishes. And it's going to be a big problem. But you can control it if they're really big. And the other way to control it, we did a project down at Broadway at the beach, I think it's called, in Myrtle Beach. It was full of common carp. It still is again now, but they were trying to reduce that population down for the sole purpose. It's a beautiful property, but it was muddy. Now they just die the heck out of the place. And it's achieving their goals for that because the people love to feed them and see them. But yeah, common carp definitely can become a problem. Grass carp are not related at all to common carp. They're called grass carp. They really should be called white amour, a completely different species. They do not interfere with reproduction of fish. So, are the fish safe to eat? I just want to say this. Don't want to get sued if something were to happen, but yes. If you're going to a small body of water, unless you're on a hazmat site where you have mercury or PCBs or some other metals, that's what bioaccumulates in fish's tissue. Um, I could joke, you could have a pond that has a septic tank leaking into the body of water. Sounds disgusting. Maybe the fish would not taste good if that's the case, but they still would be safe because that is not building up in the tissue of those fish. So again, we want to encourage people to harvest bass, and I will say the Northeast, some cultures really embrace largemouth bass, and they're paying $12 a pound, while other people are slinging the bass out. 'Cause I've told them to hang out, slinging them on the bank. Um, Fillet the bass are really easy to fillet. They're really good to eat. It's something I'm passionate about. I not only want to help kids and people learn how to catch fish, but I want to teach them to learn how to clean the fish because it's pretty simple. I mean, we got this little bag of fillets here. I think it was like 18 bass we filleted in, under 10 minutes from the time we started and cleaned up and vacuum sealed them. So, um, inherently the and I know the city of Milton Lakes, I don't know of a hazmat site that's close to the body of water, so um, they should be completely safe to eat. You can do some extensive studies to study mercury and PC, but it's very costly to do those. I would not spend that money unless I had a really large body of water and that was something was majorly concerning me to have to do that. But we have done that testing. Trout stocking. So we kind of just talked about that a little bit. Just because the lake is deep, it doesn't mean that it's going to sustain trout year round. There are some bodies of water in North Georgia in the mountains because you have different topography. Water rapidly goes into those bodies of water and comes back out. And then the water doesn't warm, and so you've got the cooler water, and you've got the right oxygen that trout can sustain themselves during the summer months. So you can keep those. So trout is another one that you want to harvest. I just saw Jen's comment, so I'll come back to that. So you stock trout in the fall, and you need to keep them out by the summer, unless you're one of those North Georgia lakes where you can keep them year round, but they're so aggressive. So you say you stock 100 trout in this body of water, you can catch out 96 of them if you try. We stock trout every year in Fort Gordon, and They have to, it's required by their permit to do that. And they couple of years they've reported catching more than we stock. So apparently we gave them some free fish. So you literally can catch every one of the trout. I love trout for programs for kids fishing days. I think Jen asked about crappie. So those are great to eat. And you want to harvest those as well. A lot of clients are going to tell you that the crappie tastes better than the bass. Maybe the taste is better than the bass. I would agree with that. I like the firmness of a bass, but Jen said they've got plenty of crappie in Milton to go catch them. So listen to that advice. And here we go. We can talk all day about fishing, but there's plenty of resources. In fact, I will put in a plug. If you're bored after this webinar and you're watching this live tonight, one of our employees, Colin, will be on Fish North Georgia, something like that, YouTube channel, talking about fishing and fish physiology. So that's more of a fishing thing. So I want to say, if you did not grow up fishing, um, get into Jen's class, learn more about it. It's really too hard to go too small on a lure. If you the smaller the bait, the more fish you have you can potentially catch. So the myth of go big or go home could be true. Maybe I want to fish some ginormous swim bait and I'm trying to target 10-pound bass. But I can tell you what I am doing. I'm limiting the number of fish I'm going to catch that day. And so a lot of times I will go out and see a brand new fisherman and they're using some giant spinner bait, and most of the bass in that lake are stunted at, 10 inches. Go with a small, well, I'll tell you this, the same guy I just mentioned, Colin Steele, we had a little little bass tournament the other day at a client's lake, and the third cast, he caught a 10-pound plus bass on a crappie jig. So you can catch big fish on small ones too. But go with a small little spinner, a small little crappie jig. It's going to open up much more opportunity to catch those small bass. And then again, a lot of times, if you're not used to fishing, there's a lot more bluegill in a body of water than the bass. The bass are the predator, and I talked about being too many, but you typically should have 10 times the number of bluegill than the bass in the body of water. So try to fish with a smaller lure is the one. If I can give any advice on fishing, that's what I would say. Fish with a smaller lure if you're new to fishing, and you're going to have more chances to catch fish. Fish with a smaller plastic worm. I think kids in their mind just have the go big or go home mentality, and they just fish these big lures, and then they wonder whether they're not catching anything, and they're really going after one or two big bass in that lake while all these other fish can never even bite that lure. It's just too big.
And specifically, we have a question, what bait to use to catch common carp?
Oh my gosh. So I grew up fishing. We grew up in Milton, like I mentioned, and we would go to the Etowah River in Canton, and it was a blast. I loved it. I mean, I really have great memories doing that. And so corn, uh, kernels of corn, but we would make dough balls. So we would make this out of oatmeal, or take bread and just work it into a ball that will with add a little bit of water and it will consistently stay on your hook. But these oatmeal baits, we would spike, we would, I mean, I thought I was like the oatmeal king because I would come up with all these different flavors. But common carp are going to smell the bait and come hit that. So it's not a lure, although they have hit lures. But something that's going to stay put. Worms work fine too. But kernels of corn, bread, or oatmeal would be my go-to. I need to go back and catch some common carp. I haven't done it in years. All right. Don't make your own aeration. And don't even, I'll go a step further. Don't even buy aeration off the internet if you don't talk to a biologist. I'm not trying to oversell you. I'm just telling you, um, there are a lot of myths, a lot of undersized systems, and you can cause more problems with improper aeration than benefits. And the reason that is there's in So in aeration, you have a couple different concepts. You have a bottom diffused aeration. So that's really became popular in the last 15 or so years. And we saw a lot of bottom diffused systems. Really shouldn't be called aeration, it should be called mixing systems, in my opinion. But at the bottom of the pond, you have some type of membrane and you're pushing air. And those bubbles then go to the surface. You capture phytoplankton that's photosynthesizing. So you go in that water column where they're photosynthesizing, that's where oxygen is created and it mixes up the whole body of water. Done properly, that's going to be a wonderful environment because now you have oxygen from the top to the bottom. Done on too small of a scale, what you're doing is taking that bottom water. It's not You're not reaching your oxygen saturation that you're going for, and that you're suspending phosphorus into the water column. So you're basically fertilizing the lake. And also, people will start aeration in the middle of the summer and bring this bad water during the hot summer months. You have no oxygen at the bottom, and they can cause an instant fish kill. But one that's undersized or one that's not acting properly can cause some harm. Then you have surface aeration, and this could be in the form of a fountain, which forces a lot of water through a restriction to make a nice display. So it may not do as much aeration um, on a fountain as it would just a surface aerator, which is just literally moving volumes of water and producing oxygen, lots of pounds of oxygen in that immediate area. So they both have their purpose. If you have an emergency situation, you want surface aeration. Now we literally, a lot of times we'll sell both because they serve two different purposes. But yeah, just wanted to point that out. I appreciate Gage adding this slide because we get a good number of calls of situations where they've caused problems by not doing proper aeration.
And a question on bottom diffused aeration timing throughout the year. Do you need to turn it off in the winter when the waters hit a certain temp, or can you run it year round?
You can run it year round. The answer would be, do you really need to? Because once the cold temperatures get here, the lake is naturally going to be destratified anyway, which is what these systems are doing. If you wanted to, if you're up north, like maybe up in the mountains in Georgia, and you wanted to not have some ice event, you can prevent that completely closing over, and we've got a lot of clients up north, and so it creates open water, and it degasses the system. So if it's iced over, you would have a lot of uh, bad water, bad environment for the fish to grow in. So in the southeast, there's really no reason to to run it after November, December. I would just get it started sometime in March before it gets too warm, and then turn it back on. Typically, they're going to run 24/7. There is some new science that you could run it at night if you're super saturating the water, superheating the water. But I've also seen some bad situations with that too. So need to be careful turning those off and turning them back on. It may not achieve its goal. How many more slides we have, Gage? I don't want to talk. If I get too long-winded, we're not going to
This is
finish
the
on
last
time.
one.
Oh, okay, good. Fish habitat. It's another little funny one. So we get this routinely. It's kind of what I said kind of early on about habitat. You've got to have about not that's I shouldn't say it that way. If your goal is to grow maximum number of fish, usually research will say 30% of the water body should have some type of habitat. Um, Even the term habitat is controversial. What am I even talking about? Water quality could be habitat, honestly, like a zone of cooler water or something. But what I mean habitat here is spawning habitat, loafing or hangout habitat, and habitat to protect small fishes. So the most common thing we see is that there's too many bass, and there's not enough middle-sized bluegill. So a client will say, "Man, I went to Home Depot and I gathered up 4 Christmas trees and I put one on all four corner of my, 2-acre pond." That did nothing at all. Um, it's just a percentage. You didn't. I mean, it's better than nothing, I guess, but you really, in that situation, had a 2 acre pond that had almost no habitat, you probably need to put about 100 Christmas trees in there. Because again, you're trying to get close to that threshold of 30% of the lake having some type of habitat for smaller fishes to hide in. So we have a myriad of artificial habitats. I love natural habitats, like Christmas trees. The problem with a Christmas tree is that it's really only good for 1 to 2 to 3 years, and it kind of just falls apart, and then you're just left with a stump. We really push spawning habitat too, especially in an older body of water. That's what Gage was setting up today. He was setting up some gravel beds in these dredged areas, so it's going to be better. And again, I'm just not a black and white person in that uh, bluegill don't need gravel to spawn. No, you're right. They don't need it, but I'm here to make things better. So the better we can create that environment for spawning, and really I'm talking about bluegill because they spawn multiple times during the summer months, spring and summer months. Um, every spawn they have, they're using less energy to get to the substrate they need. The egg production is going to be better in the proper substrate. So the net result is more bluegill. Then where are they going to hide? So if there's nowhere for them to hide, so we've got these are called mossback habitats that we installed a bunch of today. In fact, there's another habitat called an ugly tree. It's just kind of a fake Christmas tree. There's some other habitats that are made to look like grasses. There's this other really good protection habitat that's like a pyramid, and the fish can go up in there with some small holes and the bass can't get to them. But some form of something, and we have an older YouTube video. We just took junk that was sitting around everywhere. It's not attractive when the lake's drained down, but when it's under the water, you never see that it's there, and it provides places for the fish to hide in. Research will tell you that usually a combination of natural and artificial habitats is better than just one or the other. So again, you've got to have like a uh, busted up concrete or riprap rock or some fallen over trees for the bass to hang out, and then if you can connect those with, say, if you're creating a lake that's new with a point, they're going to travel. That's like a road, so they travel the point out on some habitat where they can hang out. And then you've got less energy loss, I'll say, because the bass can hang out there and just ambush a prey species. So you want to make it easier for the bass to feed, but at the same time, you're making it to where the bluegill do have a place to hide in. So what's going to happen is you're going to take all those little bitty half-inch bluegill that get eaten by the abundance of bass to where now they can make it to 3 or 4 inches. And again, that energy gain from that is going to be astronomically better, and your fish are going to finally start to grow. So keep in mind that 30%, keep in mind that something is better than nothing, but most people are not going to put enough habitat in there if your goal is going to be more bluegill.
And we've got a question about gravel spawning beds. At what depth should they be placed? Is there a maximum depth or an optimal depth? What say you?
We talked about that again today when you were working out there putting those out. We put a lot of those in because it was dredged out really well. They did a great job, and we had a lot of 5 foot flat water without a slope, and they're going to be used just fine. Typically, if you're asking that question, I assume you're asking about bluegill, because again, that's one that's going to benefit the most. Somewhere between, if you've got a lot of 5 foot water in the area, they're probably going to spawn at 2.5 foot of water. If you've got a lot of 8 foot water, they're probably going to spawn closer to 3 foot of water. If you've got really crystal clear water, um, it may be closer to 8 foot. The lake that we have, the 6 acre lake we have in Forsyth, when we drained it down this last year and started the fishery over, my mind was blown. We created a hump by the dam. The top of the hump was in about 8.5 foot of water, was covered in bluegill beds. I would have never predicted that. So I don't know at all, I can tell you that. But ideally, if I'm creating it, we're going to put a lot of our spawning bed, and don't put them all in the same depth either. Try not to put them all in the same depth. But typically somewhere between By the time they're 4 inches, 4 to 6 inches of gravel. So you're putting in 3 foot of water and you have 6 inches of gravel, it's going to be 2.5 foot. That's as shallow as I would go. And you can go as deep as 5 to 6 foot, but a lot of our stuff is in 3 to 4 foot of water. So anything any questions that popped up we didn't answer, I guess, or any last minute questions, let us know. Um, again, feel free to email us with some more questions, and we just love, we got a little slogan, education in the school of fish, kind of a play on words, but we just love to educate folks. We love, clients that use us for all of our services. I just want it done right. And spend your dollars and your time in the right areas so you're getting results out of those. We grow some really big fish for clients. We have some really pretty, beautiful. We didn't talk much about this today. We really emphasize the fishery, but sometimes maybe you're just wanting a beautiful body of water. We do a lot of that work too. With water quality and treating the water to have it aesthetically pleasing, with a fountain or with different services to keep it cleaned up so vegetation is not completely taken over. But from the fisheries perspective, just do the things right, ask the right questions, hire the folks that know what they're doing before you just start throwing fish in the body of water. Anything left, Gage?
Yeah, we got just one question left. What other baits other than live bait would you use for bluegill?
Huh. Well, down at that, we just stocked our bass in the pond that we started over on our property, and it is full of bluegill. Um, little rooster tails, little spinners. Bluegill are pretty aggressive and territorial. Um, usually I have a little curly tail grub tied on. Um, there's some little tiny crankbaits that mimic crickets. Um, on the live bait perspective, I would prefer a cricket over a worm just because it's less messy. Um, but beetle spins are really good. And I tell you, my favorite thing to do, and I saved it to the end here. I think I would rather, micro chatterbait works great. Yeah, there you go, Tony. Good call. I don't know if I've ever used a micro chatterbait, but that would work awesome, especially for bigger bluegill. But one of my favorite things to do is a lightweight fly rod, with a beadhead nymph, because that nymph is, especially if you're feeding your bluegill, which I highly recommend, they're going to grow a lot faster. Um, is that beadhead nymph falls about the same rate as a watered down fish pellet. And that is so much fun catching a big bluegill that just runs around in a circle on a fly rod. So, is that question say something about carp? Use worms? You can. You know what that said? Disappeared on me.
Yes, he asked,
Yeah,
can you
yeah,
use worms to fish for carp?
you can, uh, for sure. They work fine.
I think that's all the questions that we have.
Jen, are you going to chime in to finish this thing up? But I appreciate the opportunities to help answer some questions today. Hopefully we did.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really for taking your time, because I know you guys are ripping and running all over the place. Also, you got a big trip planned, so thank you for spending this little bit of time with us. Now, I see here people can reach out to you at office@lakework.com, call this number. Also, this will be recorded, and so if anybody would like to get this recording video and send it to your friends or anybody that has any questions, they can certainly reach out to uh, Greg at Aquatic Environmental. But otherwise, next month we're going to be talking about beavers. But today we're going to thank Greg and Gage for their time. So I know everybody can't clap for you, but I appreciate you.
Well, thank
Awesome.
you for joining.
Yeah. Oh, it looks like, what should be the best bait for the Chattahoochee trout? Oh.
You haven't answered any of these, Jen. You got to know about, you teach a fishing class. Come on.
I did. I will tell you this. So we feed our fish at one of our ponds, and it's really to grow the bluegill because there were all these tiny bluegill, and finally we got them up to about um from just a little 2 inches, we're finally up to about 8 inches with feeding for like half a season, and they're they are hungry. So the kids that I take fishing, I say, hey, we use red balls for these guys. They
Oh,
know what this size food looks like, and so they're gonna all feast, and you'll just see the whole colony just comes out of the water.
well, I'm gonna tell you a secret. Because I grew up every summer, I would be 2 or 3 weeks at a my grandparents were the camp host at Tallulah River, and I would go out by myself, 13 years of age, and I would not catch the trout unless they swallowed it. And I would catch so many, and it was bread balls. But again, you have to take the bread and you slowly add a little bit of water on your hand, and you keep working it. And this is the other key too. So you want to know what to use for the trout in Chattahoochee. If you want to go after big trout, different thing. If you want to go after the stocker trout, then a number 8 short shank hook. Most people have hooks that are way too big, and a little BB sinker above that, um, with the bread ball that's used, that's put together correctly, and wrapped around that hook is phenomenal because it's just tumbling down the river, and it just looks like something. So it's not necessarily considered natural, but it looks fairly natural, and it is hard to beat a little bread ball for the Chattahoochee River trout.
Yeah, they're humanized. They get a lot of human food interaction with the
Yep.
Chattahoochee.
Yep. And again, trout are very aggressive. They are very territorial. We'll have trout fishing days here at our pond and ball ground, and they're hitting those rooster tails and the spinners just because they don't like them in their environment. So if something that vibrates or creates flash, they're going to attack that as well.
Well, that's what I get a question about a lot, Greg, is like, where can the public go to trout fish? They call me quite often. And a lot of those private ponds are really expensive, or you end up in a
Mhm.
lottery system. And so there's opportunities at your pond to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think we're going to run out of trout this year.
Yeah.
But typically we will have that. Folks want to call and ask if we end up having some extra trout. We'll have a couple of trout fishing days because again, it's getting hot, so we have to get rid of them too. And so
Yeah.
it's let's make a deal on some good pricing because they're getting hot on us. But afraid the industry's pretty lacking on trout. We may run out.
I appreciate your time, and everybody knows how to reach out to me, knows how to reach out to Aquatic Environmental. Again, if you want to see something else, or hey, maybe in a year we do a part 2 if we want to get in depth um, on some pond ecology for sure. So thank you guys so much for your time.
All right, thank y'all. Everyone have a good night.
Thank you for having us.